I would first like to acknowledge that the session has been sponsored by the Edie Slando Virtual Learning Center, which is located in the Faculty of Education at UBC. So this is the third of 3 sessions in a project we titled Doing Sustainable Pedagogies in Early Childhood Education. And this might be your first time or second time or third time here. I think you're in for a special occasion. And we have structured this session a little bit differently from the other sessions that you may have part of before. And we will talk about the structure of this session very shortly. I would first like to welcome you here and just remind everybody that we have titled the series Doing Sustainable Pedagogy because we wanted to distinguish the work of doing sustainable pedagogies within the context of early childhood education and to poke a little bit the often maybe too simple or too superficial way of thinking about sustainability through achieving certain goals. So in this session in particular, we want to think about grappling with the tensions of sustainability and responsibility in early childhood education. And before we dive deeper into our topic for today, I also wanted to remind everybody that the 3 sessions, including today, have been possible because of a partnership with amazing educators from the UBC Childcare, who will also join us shortly. I also want to recognize my collaborator as an organizer for this project, Nancy Van Groel. And our colleague from the University of Calgary, Dr. Alex Berry, who again, since the first session, has joined us as a respondent to the educators' stories. So my deepest gratitude, first of all, to my collaborators. And I also want to recognize that Araceli is here from the Edith Landau Center, and she will provide some support for us on the technology aspect of the session. So my deepest gratitude to everybody for being here tonight. And with that, I will pass it on to Nancy Van Groel for a land acknowledgement.
Thanks, Iris. As you already mentioned, this session is thinking about sustainability and responsibility. And to me, those words are already gestures towards acknowledging land, waterways, and airways. We are all joining from different places. I know many of you are joining from all over the province, some of us closer together. I am joining from the unceded ancestral territories of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish peoples, and I acknowledge with gratitude their ongoing care, stewardship, and resistance, relations that have shaped the life of these lands and waterways. Land acknowledgements are more than just saying something at the beginning of a session, and I think everybody here will see how land is not only acknowledged but related to in very vibrant ways throughout the rest of the session. And I would like to draw on Christina Sharp's vital reminder, who says that we gather in this time of catastrophe matters. It matters how we gather. It matters that we're gathering with care, with humility, and with a willingness to notice our relationships to place, our relationships to one another, and our shared commitments to creating more livable futures together. So in addition to beginning with the land acknowledgement, I also would like to echo again, Iris, in welcoming to the session, Alex Berry, Jinhee Park, Melanie Walters, and Angie Gill. And they will be sharing stories about their practice and as well as interruptions. And Alex is going to speak a little bit more about how that's going to work, and you will experience more of how that's going to work. So welcome, Alex.
Thank you, Nancy, and thank you, Iris. Welcome, everybody. I am so grateful to be here this evening with you and to think alongside Angie, Jinhee, and Melanie in their work at UBC Childcare. I want to just share a brief framing for how we're approaching this final session in the Doing Sustainable Pedagogy series. Each of these iterations, each iteration of these gatherings has attempted to disrupt something particular about some of the conventions of sustainability in early childhood education. Today's session, we are trying to rethink discourses of sustainability as the sole responsibility of the individual citizen, which often overlooks the broader socio-ecological, material, ethical, and political constellations that shape our differential capacities for response. And so there's some familiar imaginaries of sustainability in early childhood education. The aesthetic of natural materials, the freedom of loose parts, children's creative solutions as innovation for progress with a capital P, the learnification of the environment and of waste as something for children. So today we're attempting to perhaps momentarily defamiliarize what is common about the idea of sustainability and perhaps make it a little less comfortable and a little more strange. In response to capitalist sustainability logics that have these entrepreneurial ways of greenifying early childhood without actually shifting its purposes and functions, we want to engage with these 2 hours as a space to think together about the distinct kinds of relations and ways of being that each of us here in our very unique positions and places, what we might want to invent, recuperate, or sustain. This evening, we are inviting you into an imperfect and in-process dialoguing experiment that attempts to hesitate to sustainability's insistence on forward movement and, as Iris had mentioned, on solutions. And so we'll gather around 2 incomplete moments with children shared by Jinhee and Angie, instances which we hope might become occasions for us to slow down and think together in the midst of their pedagogical work through these mundane, very ordinary, seemingly commonsensical moves throughout the day with children, and how these moments could become sites for provocation, for critical attention, and collective decision-making. I think it's also important to note that Jinhee and Angie's decision-making happens within a very particular context of UBC childcare and their pedagogical values and commitments, as Melanie will speak to. And so this evening isn't about best practices, replicability, or even inspiration, but rather we're attempting to lean into small interruptions to the sense of common sense in early childhood and how these instances might challenge us within the very distinct offline context that each of us are joining from. As Deleuze says, though speaking of film, if our sensory motor schema jam or break, then a different type of image can appear. And so as a respondent to Jinhee and Angie's stories, and in an attempt to disrupt Q&A ping pong, I'll be interfering in their storying with small cuts as a way of trying to come into an uneasy dialogue that perhaps brings something in from elsewhere. And the elsewhere that I'll be cutting in with is a rendering of various works and a sort of play on words that are mine and others. The first comes from Donna Haraway, then Joe Dummett, and finally was Gilles Deleuze. And there will be a complete list of citations that follows. And I also want to just remind everybody to please use the chat as a lively space to engage with and as a way of responding incompletely to what's being proposed. Feel free to jump in the chat with your incomplete thoughts, unfinished ideas, and questions. And so I will pass it off to Melanie.
Thank you, Alex. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us to hear about these stories of thinking otherwise in early childhood education, these in the midst stories that Angie and Jinhee will share soon. So first, I'll just start by framing our thinking within the pedagogical commitments of UBC Childcare, which you see here, and they can also be found on our website. Together, we engage with issues of social and ecological justice, including democracy, sustainability, equity, inclusion, decolonization, indigenization, kindness, and mutual respect. We think with a feminist ethics of care that leads to caring for and about others, including living others, human and non-human, and non-living others. We consider education for and about Indigenous presence and knowledges, responsibility and responsibility, common world knowledges, sustainability, democracy, and place. So last year, in the beginnings of a new early childhood setting, a unique possibility emerged. And in addition to others, these are some of the initial key questions that we lingered with. What might be possible for a 3 to 5 and under 3 early childhood setting within a purpose-built 5th floor location of a new mixed-use building? One of our first priorities, making a list of furnishings, materials, and toys for purchase to start the settings and to meet licensing requirements. What would we purchase and how would we decide? As you can see here, there's an expansiveness when you're on the 5th floor. The 3 to 5 setting looks back over the academic building rooftops of the campus core within the sound reach of the clock tower. And the under 3 setting looks out over the law building, Chan Center, towards the Museum of Anthropology, Tower Beach, and toward the expansive ocean and the islands beyond. So while situated in the same place, the views are quite different. So how will we engage with the world around us when we are so high above it? Within the settings, we saw possibilities in the emptiness of the space itself. Possibilities that provoked important questions that lead into our pedagogical intentions. What do we want to engage with? How will we fill our days? What do we want to leave space for? Some of our initial emerging pedagogical intentions enacted the unfolding of both settings. To co-create and co-learn, creating a culture of collectivity. The importance of relationship, relationality with humans, non-humans, materials, common worlding, and waste as material pedagogies. Ongoing learning and openness to new, unknown yet ideas, doing things otherwise, intentional yet not necessarily planned. During the waste as material course that I participated in a year and a half ago, I was provoked by a question that came up within that course, which was from Veronica Piscini-Ketchaba. What if we were to think ECE differently? And that question really stuck with me. Leading the unfolding of a new setting while understanding the ethical and political implications and responsibility to do it differently. How might we offer meaningful engagements and resist dominant practices and discourses in early childhood. Dominant discourses such as learning outcomes and development. In what ways could we think with the implications of early childhood education consumerism and wasting practices before creating an abundance of waste ourselves? And how might these questions inform and interrupt our daily ECE practices? We were filled with questions and few answers, and with a vision of entering into the unknown. In the emergence of living these questions, there were more questions. What does it mean to live in an ECE setting with non-representational toys? What do we pay attention to? And what tensions emerge?
It was very early in the morning, a big lecture class at 8 a.m. To get to the lecture hall, we all passed this little shop that sold good coffee and chocolate croissants. And just as a way of waking up in the morning, I would ask people to unpack objects, to take a chocolate croissant and lead me through flour and chocolate and butter and sugar and coffee and connect us to world histories that way. I would ask people to pick an object. The t-shirt that the person sitting next to them was wearing, what was printed on it, the label, the very fact of labeling, the fiber composition. If it's got polyester, then take me through the history of Purity Hall and research labs at DuPont. Back me up into nitrogen chemistry. If it's cotton, then back me into pesticides and the California water projects and where cotton is grown and the length of the fiber. And what about what you're wearing on your chest? I would ask people to take a pencil, a piece of paper, the architecture of the lecture hall that you walked past. Pick something and give me an account of it. Coffee is not enough, alas. Necessary for some of us, but not enough to properly wake up to the connectedness of the world, to our connectedness to world histories. But why not? How do t-shirts, croissants, and pencils contain their histories without our being aware of them? Why does even Donna Haraway, a historian of these particular connections, need to wake up each day to them again? The everyday, it seems, conspires against us, with that part of us that wants to live in an everyday in which objects are mere parts of the world, and it all makes a certain kind of sleepy sense. The connections Haraway instigates in the coffee shop may strike one as outrageous, certainly so in the morning. They require promiscuous knowledge. They seem to accuse one of not having done enough homework. Anxieties arise. Some look for an exit. Even worse, the connections may threaten the well-made world one lives in. One senses a potentially dangerous demand in them, and the dormant activist stirs. If I find out that t-shirts contribute to environmental degradation or coffee to poverty, how am I going to get out of bed at all? How to live? How to know? How to be comfortable? How did comfort get wired anyway?
Hi, everyone. I will share my story about the paper towel book. Several children are gathered around the largest table we have, which often is a place of spontaneous gathering. Approximately 10 paper towels are neatly glued and held together by a child's fingers, a child whose gaze is locked on the marks he was making on the paper towel with orange crayon. We created a studio space, a space where we focus engagement on materials, experimentations, process, and art makings. Here we attentively engage with the ambience of the space and its possible effect in relation to the experience. Dimmed lights accompany soft music, creating a sacred space away from the main wave of the daily flow. In the studio space, there is an abundance of various types of papers, which we have been collecting since the opening of Heron's Landing, including cardboard boxes, packaged stuffing and tubes, plastic papers, etc. pulled out plants, leaves, flowers from families, roots that were dug up from our small garden while children played outside, hang from drying line, visible traces carrying stories of our days. A glass jar that was long ago was a coffee container has been handed down to us and well taken care of. Wool and fabric pieces children have been experimenting with also have homes here and are treasured items that have been living in the studio space since the beginning, though sometimes sleeping out and traveling around the areas of the setting before returning to the studio. Glue sticks, scissors, graphite sticks, crayons, clay, and a few other familiar materials also live here. The open door let a child out of the studio space with glue sticks. Near the children's sink, some children are reaching for a basket full of paper towels. With automatism, an educator pushes the paper towel basket away from their reach. A couple of facial tissue pieces ripped into strips are left in the middle of the table after a child's attempt to turn them into a book. Another child hangs on to an educator, asking, stating, pleading, "We want to make a book." I wondered, what does it mean to make a book? And is it about making physical book, or is it about what's being written, what's going on in the story, or is there another possibility? The ideas of making, whether it might be the making of a book or a story, called for more children to join. Wanting to make a book seemed to be spreading like an echo in the middle of the room, searching for responses to bounce back from. I contemplated, why paper towels? What do they do? Did the paper towel call a child? Is it because there is an abundance of paper towels in our space? Could it be because there are no loose papers readily available? Was it about their shape, structure, and flexibility? What might paper towels be and become in the practices of ECE? We're not using the paper towels or tissue paper. Please don't grab them anymore. An educator firmly says as the basket of paper towels and a box of tissue papers get pushed away. They seem to be in no relation to what's around the counters, simply reduced to creating visual clutter, only to be away from children's reach. In contrast, another educator is sitting at a table, attentively folding paper towels into shapes in response to a child's request. I tumble with questions. What is our role and responsibility in caring for spaces? What if this could be a representation of how we care for our surroundings and materials? What role does the act of paper towel basket being put away out of child's reach play, out of child's reach play in this event? This moment prompted me to reflect on the pace of childcare, which tends to be rushed, automatic, even robotic, which often causes us to skip the thinking process in the moments that most need our attention to slow down. Seeing these events unfold in tension, I chimed in with questions. If not paper towels or tissue papers, what else could be found as a material within our space? Why have we been accumulating all the cardboard boxes and recycled papers from packaging? What does it mean, or how does it look like when we are familiar with the place and space, including everything in it? What are the implications of that? Then I asked the child with the paper towel book, "Why are you making the book?" He replied, "Because I want to." It's a very cute story about a little mouse in a house. I like it, so I want to make it. I asked, "And then? What could the book be after? What's your plan once you finish making the book?" I found myself worried about it being left behind, uncared for, on the floor, or trapped over in the cubby, as I've seen many times. About 5 minutes after this child gave shoulder shrugs to those questions, he placed the book in the garbage bin. "Why are you putting your book in the garbage?" I asked disappointedly. "Because I want to." The child simply replied and walked away to play outside around the tree, leaving the paper towel book discarded and forgotten. As I went to pick up the paper towel book from the garbage bin, I looked in the bin. Next to it were 2 white pieces of paper cut because I didn't like the lines that were not straight and I had to trim it. Here I faced my own irony, telling a child not to waste a paper towel, yet here I was wasting the pristine white paper out of a search for perfection, attempting to make a book. Seeing the paper towel waste and my own imperfect paper discard invited me to reflect. The child may have forgotten the 10-page paper towel book, but not me. The paper towel book stays with me, following my thoughts, practices, and reflections throughout ebbs and flows of our days. It was in the moment that we needed to slow down and attend, where time seemed to be stretched in tension. Educators fell back into Roth's approach of continuing the dialogue of where the papers come from, how they were made, concerns for trees. This brought me to question, what responsibilities do we have in relation to paper and paper towels? How do we revisit our deeply embedded discard practices? Some children joined this conversation concerning trees, searching for alternative material solutions. I wondered what might happen if we were to think with Tim Ingold's idea: a material is known not by what it is, but by what it does.
Emerging from the late 14th century common sense in English, a noun, an internal mental power supposed to unite or reduce to a common perception the impressions conveyed by the 5 physical senses. The etymological genealogy of common sense emerges from the Latin sensus communis and the Greek koin aesthesis, an ordinary understanding, without which one is foolish or insane. To say it's common sense suggests something as obvious, what goes without saying, the of courseness of something. Common sense becomes a matter of fact, and through its clarity and stability, positions curiosity and experimentation as unimaginable, frivolous, and in the context of early childhood, even irresponsible. A constructed consensus, common sense functions by regulating certain ways of existing. Common sense affirms an acceptable way of being in certain spaces, such as the childcare center, a space that produces common sense understandings of what it means to be here, and with Sarah Ahmed, how one ought to be here. Challenges to common sense or moves against it become occasions then to better understand, what makes common sense common through its exclusions. Disrupting common sense's transcendence and given neutrality, we might learn to signal what anthropologist Joe Demmett describes as a bodied form and politics of perception, and a potential to reorganize the docility of daily habits. With Demmett and Deleuze, we are not awake when we're awake. Our eyes are open, but we perceive only cliches, only what we are interested in perceiving. Even if we read newspapers, watch cable news, CNN, BBC, or Fox, or follow and resend Facebook posts, the war-torn, poverty, and disease-stricken, unequal, unbearable world is tragic, but somehow tolerable. How to disrupt our own tolerance, how to see the intolerable in the everyday. Another kind of thinking, another kind of politics to come, as something to be invented that does not already make sense. What is common in the early childhood art studio? What do early childhood waste aesthetics make tolerable? For whom? What kinds of possibilities and unlikely partners might show up through learning in the absence of individual moral responsibility? A proposition that not only humans call and not only humans answer. How do we learn to listen for these calls and respond in the company of others? To learn to silence what and why monologue reflection, a mirroring back of the mind upon itself, and hear the calls of how and with whom. With Haraway, responsibility isn't known in advance. It emerges, even as our responses begin to break down as we lovingly craft them. And so we want to ask you all, what is common sense in early childhood education? And so we'll take 10 minutes in breakout rooms to think through this question together. Welcome back, everyone. It's nice to see some faces. We just want to invite you to use the chat as a space to, jot down or type in some partial resonances or maybe even just a word that came up from your conversation in the breakout rooms. And it'd be great to hear what came about for you in your conversations through the chat. So Anna says, in our group, we all agreed that we live in a non-common sense as educators since the children's perspectives are so different as that of an adult. I wonder if anybody resonates with that proposition from Anna, or maybe something else came up in your conversations that you'd like to add, however incompletely, in the chat. And Sharon has said common sense is not common knowledge among a group of individuals. Conversations are important to build common knowledge and resist assumptions. Eileen says common sense can be assumption and everyone can have different common sense based on their life experience and cultural background. Maybe we can keep, jotting down our responses and thoughts and continue to hear from Angie. And then keep the chat lively and living as we're listening to Angie's story.
Yeah, it's still the part of the story that I've read, and I'll reread the last part again so we can revisit. It was in this moment that we needed to slow down and attend, where time seemed to be stretched in tension. Educators fell back into the rote approach of continuing the dialogue of where the papers come from, how they were made, concerns for trees. This brought me to question, what responsibilities do we have in relation to paper and paper towels? How do we revisit our deeply embedded discard practices? Some children joined the conversation concerning trees, searching for alternative material solutions. I wondered what might happen if we were to think with Tim Ingold's idea, a material is not by what it is, but by what it does. And the next story is about learning, because our approach to materials, the way that we see the materials and what can become the materials in our setting may not be as traditional as the childcare settings. Often there are a lot of questions about learning and in relation to the question what children do all day here and what happens here in our setting. And recently there was a comment from a child to our new colleagues, and I was able to continue that conversation. It was first quite provoking because educators felt quite hurt to hear, "You're not a real teacher." And I'm sure a lot of us encountered that, especially in the 3 to 5 setting. And that made me think about what learning and how learning happens in this setting, and also in relation to the choices we make, what can be the materials. And the image shows the children's responses. And the children's responses gave me goosebumps, indicating that there was a lot more behind the mere, at first hurtful comment, "You're not a real teacher." Their responses seem to reflect various ways each child is experiencing learning, from math and ABCs to learning to be kind and respectful. They seem to encompass learning beyond learnification. In conversation with Melanie and Deb, as we shared our challenges, who are our managers, as we shared our challenges and moments of tension about what children do or learn all day, Fiesta was introduced. Some of the responses I'm finding in thinking with Fiesta's ideas include reconsidering our daily ECE practice in relation to the 3 functions of education, which are qualification, socialization, and subjectification. As Fiesta stresses, all 3 functions are essential, but emphasizing qualification, which are skills and competencies, could reduce the richness of education. Education traditionally focused on qualification, which could be reduced to be measured, but BSTA insists on reasserting ethical and democratic dimensions of education. And this supports us to view early childhood education as a place of learning beyond learnification, where we deeply think of why and what of the education that honors the messy and uncertain process of living and learning together in the shared time and space.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. I'd like to share a story that I had after coming to this new setting. I'll start my story where the story begins, the ethical tension. Since I started at this new setting, I often find myself in a place of tension between what I know, what I feel, and what I imagine could be. When this opportunity of presenting doing sustainability, I wondered what the most relatable story for fellow ECEs in the field would be. I found myself sitting with a particular decision that felt small at first, but ended up revealing a much larger set of questions and values. The environment and its challenges. Our outdoor space is modest, a relatively small deck. Unlike many early childhood settings with trees, slides, or swings, or to have trikes and scooters, we're perched high on the 5th floor with no trees casting shade or surrounding buildings sheltering us from the sun. Instead, our space is exposed, wide open to the elements, to sky, and to time itself. And we feel this. On chilly mornings, children often ask, "Where's the sun?" anticipating its warmth, which usually reaches our side of the deck later in the day. The movement of the sun became part of our daily rhythm. As winter approaches, this connection grew stronger. We longed for the warmth it offered, especially since the elevated deck tends to catch the wind, making cold days feel even colder. When that wind combined with rain and gray skies, I found myself thinking of a tire jumperoo we used to have at a previous center where I have worked for many years. The comfort of familiar solutions and the challenges. Initially, the idea of bringing in a tire jumperoo seemed both practical and comforting. The children were eager to climb, jump, and move, often improvising by using the sofa as a springboard for physical activity. The jumperoo felt like a familiar, ready-made solution to support this energy and enthusiasm. I imagined it would satisfy their needs, provide physical stimulation, and serve as a playful addition to our space. However, this seemingly simple idea was gently challenged by Melanie, who asked, "Why do you think it has to be a tire jumperoo? What other alternatives can you think of?" Her question stayed with me. It invited me to reflect on my assumptions. Was I relying on a familiar object because it offered a quick solution? Was I unintentionally directing children's play toward a specific goal rather than offering materials that allowed more open-ended creative explorations? Was I defaulting to my past experiences at the expense of this new context and its unique possibilities? At the same time, our team had already begun to explore another kind of question, one rooted in material engagement. We started experimenting with plastic snack packaging from our snacks and lunches. We began to wonder what might happen if we paused and spent time with this waste, seeing it as full potential. We started by encouraging children to save plastic packaging from their snacks, wash them, put them on the towel next to the sink to dry, and once they dry, then display them in a shared space. This simple practice began to shift our thinking. Waste started to appear as a readily available resource, something that could invite attention, creativity, and collaboration. Thoughtful conversations began to emerge. Educators who visited our space began to ask questions about our choices. Some expressed surprise or confusion at the absence of conventional toys, asking, "Where are all the toys? Then what do you want me to do?" Or commenting, "Children are going to be bored." These questions led us deeper into reflection on the role of materials, the environment, and our own expectations as educators. During this period, one of the educators brought in an old, worn-out sofa cover that had been sitting unused under her bed. She wondered whether it could be repurposed in some way. Her curiosity sparked a collaborative idea. What if we fill the sofa cover with waste? Specifically, non-recyclable materials like styrofoam blocks and soft plastic that are so abundant around us, but rarely gets recycled, to create something entirely new. Could it take the shape of a sofa? Would it help hold together with lumpy or uneven materials? With the uneven and thin or thick garbage? We were curious and interested and found the project enticing. Thus began the project that would become known as Waste Sofa. The children's engagement. What has been most striking is how differently each child engages with the waste sofa. One child uses it to test their balance, carefully navigating its uneven surface while holding onto nearby furniture for support. Another child drags it across the room like a snail pulling its shell. Some jump on it with full force, curious to see if they can crush the styrofoam within. One child has discovered a hole in the fabric and repeatedly reaches inside, pulling out materials and making the hole larger over time. They even recognize familiar wrappers and recall which child brought them in. Another child routinely curls up underneath like a blanket, snuggling in with the stuffed toy and using it as a space of comfort and retreat. These diverse and imaginative interactions have prompted me to reflect more deeply. What shapes how we interact with materials? Why does this object, a sofa filled with plastic waste, invite such varied responses? How do these experiences shape our understanding of relationships, not only with physical materials, but with one another? Learning to respond, not just react. Looking back, I realized that the tire jumper represented more than just a piece of equipment. It symbolized my instinct to reach for something familiar, something I knew had worked before. It was a comforting option, shaped by my experience and desire to meet the children's needs quickly and effectively. But Melanie's question unsettled that comfort in the best possible way. It prompted me to wonder, what if I didn't reach for the ready-made solutions? What might happen if I chose to linger with the discomfort and listen more closely to the materials, children, and the new environment itself?
Sustain. From the late 13th century, sustenin, a transitive, to provide the necessities of life. Also in the physical senses, to keep from falling or sinking, hold up or upright. Give assistance to, keep going. From the stem of Old French sostenir, hold up, bear, suffer, endure. From Latin sustenere, hold up, upright, furnish with means of support, bear, undergo, endure. Sustain, from an assimilated form of sub or up from below, and tenere, to hold from below, to stretch. A child snail struggles to drag their plastic-filled shell across the room. Another is soothed, held under a blanket of styrofoam and polymer wrappers. What might come into view if it wasn't possible to see waste as a resource for learning, but as active in its own right? What does it feel like to be held by waste? What might early childhood education need to refuse to insist on the possibility of learning to live in a world already ahead of us, stretching, suffering, holding up from below, already inventing an everyday? We're going to invite you to engage with this question again in your breakout rooms. What might early childhood education need to refuse to insist on the possibility of learning to live in a world already ahead of us? Welcome back, everyone. We were just talking in our little group around just trying to think through this question together. It's definitely it's a difficult one. And Angie, you had asked me, do you want to ask again? And then we can
Yes.
think through what you asked
Yes.
together.
So the question was, what might early childhood education need to refuse to insist on the possibility of learning to live in a world already ahead of us? So the last part, a world already ahead of us, what this could mean if it was, if what I was guessing was that it's the world that's constantly changing, and for us as human, it's taking longer for us to adapt to the changes that the world is already presenting. That was my guessing, but I was wondering what you meant when you said the world is already ahead of us.
Yeah, and I think that that question, Angie, opened up I don't know, I think a conversation that circles back to, I guess, maybe one of the intentions, if I can think through it, in the Doing Sustainable Pedagogies series is, trying to disrupt this idea of sustainability as this developmental growth that is constantly looking towards some kind of developmental goal or some solution in the name of, continued progress. And so I think that like question around grappling with this idea that the world is already ahead of us kind of interrupts that a little bit, and shifts that like movement forward. Um, and also to kind of question this idea that the human can manage or control the world, that it as if it's ours to manage. Maybe others have other thoughts and responses to that as well. I see in the chat, Romelda, your comment, the world is ahead of us, messy, chaotic, messy, problematic. Resist might mean resisting ages and stages of child development. So it's interesting to think those correspondences between dominant discourses in sustainability and dominant discourses in early childhood in terms of ages and stages as a sort of accumulative linear way of thinking about growth.
And sustainable development goals. Like that's such familiar language to early childhood education. It's so, yeah, the correspondence, as you say, is very strong and can take root very easily. Like the sustainable development goals language is very easy to take up into early childhood education, and like you were saying at the beginning, Alex, the like greenification of our programs, and instead of thinking about, you know, what kind of world are we participating in, holding up, making possible, or like you say, is already there. Like we're not even making it possible. It's happening ahead of us.
Aaron, we talked about resisting the idea of positionality of the educator being the most important in the classroom. I think this kind of relates with, I took some notes from the chat around these ideas about common sense. And someone made the comment about how children actively interrupt these common sense perspectives. And so they are sort of this, like they can propose this exception to common sense that I think has a real possibility for disorienting us. And also making visible dominant assumptions, right? That often are maybe held by adults. Do others want to jump in?
I want to recognize these moments of silence as not wasting time, since we're talking so much about waste. I do think we're encountering ideas and questions, and I do think this is part of doing sustainable pedagogies. I think the 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 care to the to and respect to the complexity is part of it. I mean, it's easy to take the plastic and put it in the recycling bin and think that we have resolved sustainability issues. But I think like throughout the series, the and with this beautiful stories that Angie and Jinhee told today, I think there's a dimension to sustainability that we kind of tend to not pay attention to because of that common sense that we're so invested in. But I'm sure there's lots of moments of silence.
I think it's even woven into some of the comments. Like, I see words like slow and rush, like temporalities of sustainability, like, and going back to, again, Alex's provocation of the word sustain, and even that has like a time to it. And yeah, the gaps, the glitches that we've experienced even in this weird space, the silences are so important to, if we're going to say that we are resisting this linear notion of sustainability and linear notion of what early childhood can be or become.
I think that Daniela's comment is also important too, in when she says refuse silence on injustice. That also, like we can be slow and, we can think through processes, but in the same breath, this doesn't just mean that like anything goes and, we just are free flowing and go with the flow, but that like we are coming in with intentions and commitments that shape the decisions that we make, right? That it is this rigorous collective work to trying to make decisions in a democratic way. And that in choosing to not do something, you are also making a decision there.
One of the things that we've been discussing recently is how some families want to see a schedule. They want to know the routine of the day. They want to see that tangible movement through the day with what they expect or think should happen. And that's been something that we've been trying to work through and figure out how can we represent that somehow for families or for auxiliary educators, people visiting, coming through the space, to gain more understanding of what happens here and why. And at the same time, that sustains time, that sustains the ebbs and flows of the day, that don't reduce the day to a schedule where now we do this, then we do that, and then we do this other thing because we always do that.
Yeah, adding on to what Melanie is saying, as I'm looking at our ebbs and flows, I try to actually write it down to see what possible responses could be. And something that I thought it was interesting is that who actually leads this schedule, like what's happening at what time. And I don't think it's children. It's often the adults. And so to probably revisit why we actually make this schedule, so that's not actually somewhat dictating what children's experience or engaging would be, but more as like a cue for adults to create some sort of cohesiveness in what it looks like free flow, but there's definitely the direction informed by the intention behind. Even it looks like it's all open, everybody seems to be freely flowing. Like the purpose of schedule, again, back to why and what of the education and what we're doing, I think might be something that we can reconsider in thinking about the sustaining of the time or the role of time in sustainability.
I think we can move with Jinhee.
Okay. Reflection. How do we return to and maintain the space of not knowing? Our program has come a long way. We have a full enrollment, a team of educators who act as thinking partners to one another, and shelves filled with carefully chosen materials collected over time. Each item holds stories. It is comforting to know that I have them exactly where in the space, and I see myself more at ease, the feeling that I once longed for when everything felt raw and unsteady. And yet, despite discomfort, I feel a pullback toward the unknown. There was something in that early disorientation, something in the not knowing that forced me to be more present. I remember the feeling of walking into a day, not knowing how it would unfold, having only my attention and my curiosity to guide me. It was exhausting, but also expensive. I noticed more. I listened harder. I felt myself in wonder. Now that things are more stable, I find myself asking, how do I return to and maintain that state of uncertainty and openness? Not because I must, but because I choose to. How do I make space for questions? Questions like, what do you do all day? How do I hold on to the gift of uncertainty when the ground beneath me no longer shifts? With a sense of precaution, I stay alert for moments that might unmoor me again. The anxiety I felt in those early days came more from my own projections than from the children's reality. I worried they might be bored or feel disconnected, but they never seemed to mind our lack of toys or resources. No one asked for a fire engine, a set of puzzles, or even a tire jumper route. Once a child asked me if we had a ball. We didn't, but that afternoon, we spent hours kicking around an empty glove box, laughing until our side ached. And still, we don't have a soccer ball. The waste sofa is getting fuller every day, and it is also growing in us as part of our identity. It isn't as efficient and certainly isn't neat. But in its messiness, it invited something deeper. The process of building it, touching, stuffing, dragging, reshaping every time we use it, helped me to see the importance of pausing and holding space for uncertainty and allowing space for materials and relationships to evolve together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jinhee. I want to hold on to some of what you just proposed to us. And we want to continue to think with you around what is commonsensical in our practice, what is familiar, comfortable in the dailiness of our lives with children. What are the habitual routines that give shape to our lives with children? And with Lens Taguchi, how does the everyday we exercise and are exercised by create a particular mode of existence and attention with children that's often centered around managing and correcting them within normative flows? And so to hold up this ubiquitous question that Jinhee has brought to us, what do you do all day? I'd like to invite us into a small exercise that perhaps might help us to flesh out and pay attention to one element of your dailiness with children. And in this invitation, I'll invoke Cristina Delgado Vintimilla in asking, how does the everyday we make with children actively make us back? And so you'll find instructions for an exercise in the chat, hopefully momentarily. And we're inviting you through this exercise in your breakout rooms to try and pay attention with excruciating detail to an ordinary routine in your life with children. So for instance, cubby time, lining up, circle time, taking out the garbage, nap time, toileting, diapering. And as you tune into this daily moment, consider some of the prompts that we have in the document in the chat and jot down some of your responses. So someone in your group can propose a routine or a moment from their practice or their life with children that you can think with as a group. And you can collectively map out this moment together using the prompts that we've offered you as a jumping off place. And I also want to underscore that we are not expecting that we move through all of these questions because there's quite a few of them. But hopefully these questions and these prompts are just sort of a way to get the conversation going and as a way to get us paying attention to these daily habits of ours. We would love to hear how the conversations went, what emerged for you. And again, we were also having our own our conversation here. And I wonder, Jinhee, if you want to maybe share a little bit of what we were talking about. I had asked Jinhee about this powerful imagery of the children and her kicking around a soccer ball that wasn't a soccer ball. It was a box.
Um, it was a glove box. It was not actually empty, but I had to empty it out to be able to kick it. So children wanted to play soccer. And of course, we didn't have a ball. So we looked around, what can we kick here safely? And then like we tried kicking some hard things like driftwoods that I found from the beach. And there were some other like flower pots, plastic, and none of them really seemed to be working well. So we're like, okay, you know what? Let's just find a box. And then I had a box full of gloves. So I got that from the washroom and then just took out all the gloves and then filled it up with the plastic packagings. I mean, it was the beginning of the program. So I had a lot of soft plastic bags. So I crunched them all up and then stuffed it in the box. The box held the shape for a while. So we started kicking it to each other, talking about just mundane things. And it was fun. And then even though it's a square box, right? But then it's still hard to catch it. You can't go really far. And they were just running around everywhere, kicking that box. And then eventually it got wet, so it broke. So we're like, okay, no more ball. Can't kick the wet box that is broken. Box is done, gone. And then suddenly the child kicked something to me. And then, without thinking, I kicked back. And then I was like, oh, what is this? And then it was actually his lunch bag. And then I stopped. I was like, oh, I don't think this is a good idea. I don't think I should be kicking your lunch bag around. And then the child questioned me, why not? It's not going to break. And then I think those kind of dilemmas that I had that day, and then it stayed with me. Yes, why not? Because it's sturdier than the box. And then that's probably the best resource that I have right now for kicking. But then what does that make me? Kicking the child's lunch bag around the deck, an educator. Um, I had the dilemma, and then we stopped shortly after. I said, I have to think about this. And then the child seemed to think that, why? Why do you have to think about this? This is my bag. I'm okay with it. Why are you so worried about it? Why are you so invested in it? Yeah, so that was the experience about kicking the glove box in that afternoon.
I'm so interested in all of the dilemmas and the problems that you encountered in this absence of toys, right? That, okay, we don't have a soccer ball, so how do we create a soccer ball? Or, how do we use those dilemmas and those problems that emerge in those absences as possible spaces for making decisions collectively with children, and bringing in, their perspectives in terms of trying to create some kind of democratic process and some kind of response, that's not just about you coming in and finding a solution, but thinking about that as an opening for thinking with children and inventing something.
And not for the sake of not having the ability to have things. Like some of the families coming and saying, oh, you don't have money for a ball or for trucks, we can give them to you. We can donate those to you. But that intentional decision making.
It is actually hard to respectfully decline things when they're coming from a place where of care, right? Like oh, Jinhee, like you only have brown paint? Like I have tons at home. Like, do you want them? Like I can bring it tomorrow. And then that's why we didn't feel that deficit. The children I chose brown color out of I had some other colors too. I mean white, black. Anyway, so the reason I chose brown was because we were gonna paint over the cardboard box. And we chose like which color do we want to do it, and then children picked brown. So we had a brown paint with the different types of brushes, and we were just kind of mixing it with a different amount of water. So it has a different, like water content in it. And then we were just kind of seeing how, and then it was a sunny day. So it would dry up so quickly on the cardboard box. And children were peeling it and then touching it once it was dried. Like, why is this one is, stronger color than this one? Why? And then I could see that they were wondering about that. And then I myself is in it together. But right at that moment when parent came for a pickup, for that parent, this was definitely a scene of deficit. This daycare just opened up, doesn't have things. They need more things. But then that's gonna limit our possibilities, our space of unknowing. Like we usually have a lot of paints and colors and all those construction papers, and there's numerous things that we can use. We're full of resources for the sake of children's learning. But because of those, we're so comfortable, and then we don't really have a space of wondering, what if I don't have that? How would change the situation? How would change my thinking? Um, and then the intentional choice of not wanting to equip everything from the very beginning um, took me to this place of unknown. Like I wouldn't have experience of kicking the empty glove boxes in the afternoon for several hours if I had the balls, right?
Because it's almost time for us to say goodbye, at least for now. I would again like to take the opportunity to thank you for being here and to thank our presenters. If you have ever organized a workshop, you know that there is always an enormous amount of work that goes behind the scenes, and this is no different. I know that Angie and Jinhee and Melanie and Alex and Nancy really listen to each other with care and build this session together very, very thoughtfully. I do want to leave you with a couple of thoughts, and then Nancy would help us move along without having a sense of a complete closure. Recently listened to a beautiful talk by Dwayne Donald, who is a professor. I don't think he's with you, Alex. He's in the University of Alberta. And an Indigenous scholar. And he said something that really stayed with me. And he said, sustainability is not a question of science and technology. It's a social and cultural issue. And I think hopefully through these session, we got a glimpse of how we might think differently about sustainability, and as something that requires, I think, hard work, but interesting work, and something that is sustained through this kind of gatherings, these kinds of dialogues, these kinds of paying attentions, these kinds of connecting with, Alex from Calgary and other people who are local. And I think on that note, I'm going to pass it on to Nancy to think how we might continue this conversation.
I'm going to be very brief because I know what time it is, and also there is no way to bring a perfect sense of closure to a series that's about the ongoingness and the doing. So I don't think we can endeavor to try to do that. What I will say is that in all of our gatherings over the past 6 months, is
A
it 5
year.
months? A year? Okay. In all of our gatherings over the past year, well, in our actual sessions, we've saved the chat from each session. We have taken notes. We have bits and pieces of the ways that the audience has engaged with us on Padlet and otherwise. And we now can go back to those traces, those ideas, and perhaps offer something back to this community. I don't know what that will look like, probably something quite propositional, partial, incomplete, but we hope that these stories and how they've come together and woven this really distinct image, maybe more than an image. It's moving, so it's more than a static image, but this invitation to think and do sustainability differently and really challenge our beliefs and our ideas about sustaining pedagogical work. We hope that this has opened something different for all of you. And please stay in touch. Please connect with us with resonances, ideas. If you didn't have the time to add something into the chat, feel free to email us and stay connected for more work in the future. So yeah, that's my imperfect, partial way of not knowing how to tend to an ending here, or trying to tend to an ending of this 3-part series, which of course will have reverberations and resonances in more than just this, even in how we live on as a recording on the Edith Landau YouTube channel. So thank you everybody for being a part of it, and we look forward to where it takes us in the future.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank
Thank
you, everyone.
Thank you.